Welcome back to the show, everyone. I can't believe this is already our 10th deep dive into all things aviation.
It's amazing how quickly they come around.
It really is. And for today, we've got two really fascinating stories that we're going to dig into. One looks at a major airline that's having to get creative with keeping its planes in the air.
Oh,
And the other one focuses on a cargo airline that is under some pretty intense scrutiny after a rather unsettling incident.
oh, wow. Sounds like we have a lot to unpack today.
Exactly. So why don't we jump right in?
Sounds good.
All right, let's start with Indigo Airlines. They're based over in India, and they're dealing with quite the predicament right now. Dozens of their aircraft are grounded because of problems with their Pratt& Whitney engines.
Oh, that's never good, especially when you think about all the scheduling and passengers relying on those planes. What are they doing to manage that?
Well, it seems like they're turning to a solution that's pretty common in the industry, something called wet leasing.
Ah, wet leasing. It's essentially like renting a car, but instead of a car, it's a whole airplane crew, maintenance, insurance, the works.
Exactly. Think of it like you need to get somewhere, but your car's in the shop. You wouldn't sit around waiting, you'd rent one.
Right.
Makes perfect sense.
Well, Indigo is taking that approach. And according to Aviation, they've already wet leased 20 aircraft. We're talking A320s, B737s, and even some B777s. They're not messing around.
Wow, 20 aircraft. That's a pretty significant commitment. It seems like they're dedicated to keeping their operations running smoothly.
It definitely seems that way. And it's not just about putting out fires either. The article even mentions that Indigo is thinking about adding more long-range jets through these wet leases to explore some new markets.
Now, that's really interesting. It suggests that they see wet leasing as a strategic move, maybe even a potential avenue for growth rather than just a temporary fix. It does make you wonder, though, are there any risks associated with relying so heavily on wet leases? I mean, wouldn't they become dependent on other airlines? What happens if those airlines raise their prices or if they suddenly have availability issues?
Those are definitely valid concerns. It's a trade-off, right? You gain flexibility, sure, but you also expose yourself to those market fluctuations and the possibility that you might not have an aircraft when you need one.
And then there's the whole question of brand consistency. Passengers flying on a wet leased plane might find that the crew, the service, even the cabin itself isn't exactly what they expected from the airline they booked with.
It's like going to your favorite coffee shop, and suddenly the baristas are wearing different uniforms, the music's different, and even the coffee blend has changed. It might still be good, but the experience isn't quite the same.
Exactly. And that can affect how passengers perceive the airline and potentially impact their loyalty. It's a balancing act for sure.
Speaking of balancing acts, it looks like Indigo's CEO, Peter Elbers, recently made a statement about their strategy going forward. He said, and I quote, "We'll keep some flexibility of these leases going forward."
Oh, that's interesting. What do you make of that?
Well, it seems to me like he's recognizing the need for a more long-term approach that incorporates both wet leasing and investing in their own fleet. It sounds like they're trying to diversify their options and not rely solely on one solution.
So they're playing the long game.
Yes.
I wonder what our listeners think about all of this.
Yeah.
Imagine you're a frequent flyer with Indigo. Does their reliance on wet leases make you hesitant to book with them, or do you appreciate their efforts to maintain operations despite these challenges?
Yeah, it's a great question to consider. Would you prioritize that consistent brand experience even if it meant potentially dealing with more delays or cancellations? Or would you rather have the peace of mind knowing the airline's doing everything it can to stick to its schedule, even if it means some variability in the flying experience? It's something we're seeing airlines and passengers grapple with more and more these days.
Definitely a lot to think about.
Okay.
Okay, so let's shift gears now and head over to Nigeria. We're going to take a closer look at a cargo airline called Allied Air that's currently facing some serious scrutiny after a pretty concerning incident back in December of 2024.
Oh, what happened?
Well, it involves a Boeing 737-400 freighter that had, let's just say, a less than smooth landing in Abuja.
A less than smooth landing, what do you mean?
Well, the flap system malfunctioned during the approach. And then, get this, upon touchdown, the landing gear actually detached.
Oh, wow. That sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, definitely not ideal. And I think this is a good time to maybe pause for a second and just make sure everyone's on the same page about the importance of flaps and landing gear.
Yeah, good point.
I mean, they might sound like minor details to some, but they're absolutely essential for a safe landing.
Absolutely. flaps, those extendable panels on the wings, well, they help generate more lift, especially at those lower speeds. And that's super crucial during takeoff and landing.
Right, so you need those to control the aircraft at those critical phases of flight.
And then, of course, the landing gear. Well, that's what allows the plane to actually touch down on the runway and taxi around the airport.
Pretty important stuff. So in this case, neither system was working as it should have been, which, well, I can only imagine that made for a pretty stressful landing.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be in the cockpit for that. And the Nigerian Safety Investigation Bureau, the NSA, they are taking this incident very seriously. They're conducting a really thorough investigation, looking closely at the right main landing gear assembly, the flap drive system components, and they're even examining the aircraft's tires.
So it sounds like they're leaving no stone unturned.
Yeah, they want to find out exactly what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening again.
And this actually brings up a really important point. I mean, it's a reminder that even what might seem like a small or insignificant mechanical issue can actually snowball into a much larger and potentially even dangerous incident.
Oh, absolutely. It really highlights how in aviation, even the smallest details can have a huge impact. Regular maintenance, thorough inspections, and strict adherence to all those safety protocols, those are non-negotiable. It's all about making sure those little things don't turn into big problems down the line.
Couldn't agree more. And it seems like the NSA is taking that to heart because they've actually gone so far as to order the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority to inspect all of Allied Air's aircraft.
Really? All of them?
Yep, every single one. They want to make sure there aren't any other potential vulnerabilities lurking out there. That's a pretty significant step, don't you think?
It really is. It shows how seriously they're taking this incident. They want to get a handle on this, figure out what happened, and ensure the safety of Allied Air's entire operation moving forward. It's all about preventing a similar incident from happening again.
Right, it's about being proactive and not just reactive. So let me ask you this. If you were in charge of another cargo airline, what lessons would you take away from this Allied Air incident?
That's a good question. I think for me, it really emphasizes the importance of creating a culture of safety. It's not just about ticking boxes and following procedures, but it's about building an environment where everyone, from the mechanics and the pilots to the management, feels empowered to speak up about any potential safety concerns.
So creating a space where safety is everyone's top priority.
Exactly. And where everyone is encouraged to contribute to that culture of continuous improvement.
It's about fostering that open communication and a sense of shared responsibility. Well said. Okay, let's shift gears a bit now and talk about something a little more, shall we say, uplifting. We're going to talk about the comeback of a true giant of the skies.
Ooh, I think I know where this is going. You're talking about the Airbus A380, right? And specifically, Etihad Airways bringing theirs back, especially that recent flight to Singapore.
You got it. It wasn't too long ago that the A380 seemed like it was on its way out. Airlines were retiring them left and right, talking about concerns with fuel efficiency and changing travel patterns.
Yeah, there was definitely a trend towards those smaller, more fuel-efficient aircraft that could handle a wider range of routes. The A380, with its massive size and 4 engines, was seen as less adaptable and maybe even less cost-effective for a lot of airlines.
Right. It was seen as a bit of a dinosaur in a rapidly changing landscape.
Yeah.
But now it seems like the Super Jumbo is staging a comeback. Etihad's move, well, it suggests that they're betting on a surge in demand, particularly for those long-haul flights.
And don't forget about the luxurious amenities. Those private suites they call the residence, for example. They're definitely banking on attracting those premium passengers who are looking for a truly unique flying experience.
It's all about that high-end travel experience. And they're not alone. Singapore Airlines, one of the biggest fans of the A380, they're bringing theirs back too. And they're even investing in sustainable aviation fuels, or SF, to try to make these big birds a bit more eco-friendly.
Now, that's a really interesting development. It seems like airlines are trying to find that sweet spot, balancing the demand for these larger, more comfortable aircraft with the growing pressure to reduce their environmental impact.
It's a tightrope walk for sure, trying to meet the needs of passengers while also being responsible stewards of the environment.
It's a challenge, but it's one that the industry is actively working on, and it's really encouraging to see that commitment to sustainability.
Absolutely. It's clear that the future of aviation is going to be shaped by all these different factors, from passenger demand and economic considerations to those technological advancements and environmental concerns.
It's such a dynamic and complex industry, always evolving. And as we've seen today, even those seemingly isolated incidents like a grounded fleet or a landing gear malfunction, well, they can actually tell us a lot about the bigger picture, about the challenges and the opportunities that airlines are navigating right now.
So true, it's all interconnected. All right, so let's turn our attention to you, our listeners. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this whole A380 resurgence. Do you think it's here to stay this time? Or is it just a temporary reprieve before it fades away for good?
Mm.
And what about those efforts to make aviation more sustainable? Do you think airlines are doing enough, or do they need to step up their game?
Those are great questions to consider. We're at a pivotal moment in aviation, and the decisions made today will shape the future of how we fly and experience the world.
It's a fascinating time to be following this industry, that's for sure. And with that, let's move on to our next topic, fractional ownership and the rise of supersonic business jets.
Yeah, it really is amazing to see all these different factors converging and shaping the future of flying.
I know, right? And it's not just about supersonic travel either. There are so many other exciting things happening, like those electric and hybrid electric aircraft we keep hearing about. And then you have the advancements in autonomous flight technologies.
Oh, yeah. And let's not forget about space tourism. It seems like that's becoming more and more accessible.
It really does feel like we're on the verge of something incredible. Who knows what we'll be talking about in our next 10 deep dives? I know, right? The possibilities are endless. Well, I think we've covered quite a bit of ground today. We've talked about grounded planes, wet leases, the A380 making a comeback, and that race to supersonic flight. Before we wrap things up, what are some of the key takeaways you think our listeners should remember from this deep dive?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is just how resilient the aviation industry is. I mean, they're facing so many challenges right now. You have supply chain issues, rising fuel costs, and that constant pressure to reduce
Right.
emissions.
A lot to deal with.
But even with all of that, airlines are finding ways to adapt, to innovate, and to overcome those challenges. We're seeing them form strategic partnerships, embrace new technologies, and develop those new business models.
It's really impressive to see them rise to the occasion.
It is. And it's not just about adapting to those challenges either, it's about pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
You're right. I mean, the return of the A380, the development of those supersonic jets, those are some pretty bold moves. They really show how committed the industry is to progress, to finding new and better ways to connect the world.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, I think the most important thing to remember is that the future of aviation is not set in stone. It's something that's being shaped right now by the choices we make, the investments we prioritize, and the innovations we decide to embrace.
So it's in our hands, in a way.
Exactly. We have the power to shape how we fly and how we experience the world.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to ponder. If you could invent one aviation innovation, what would it be? Would you design a plane that runs entirely on clean energy? Maybe a teleportation device that completely eliminates travel time? Or something else entirely? It's such a fascinating time to be following this industry, and the possibilities really do seem endless. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies, everyone.